This work that I'm talking about today is the third in a series of paintings, the world's greatest artworks that I will be presenting here at the Arts Association. Today I'm talking about Botticelli's Primavera. The tempera painting, Primavera, by the Italian Renaissance artist Sandro Botticelli, was painted in the late 1470s and early 1480s. It is one of the most popular paintings in Western art, but also one of the most written about and most controversial paintings in the world. Today it resides in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. And what you see over there is the painting in the Uffizi Gallery. You can see they've placed a classical sarcophagus beneath the painting, and then on the opposite wall you can see the one of the other mythologies of Botticelli, the Pallas and Athena painting. This complex allegorical and mythological painting ranks among the greatest treasures of the early Renaissance painting of all time, and brings together the elegance of Gothic art, the decorative beauty of the international Gothic, and the humanistic narrative of the Italian Renaissance. And it's especially the humanistic narrative that's of great importance in the interpretation of this work. Primavera was the earliest of Botticelli's mythologies. Another very well-known one of his mythologies is this painting, The Birth of Venus, which was actually the companion piece to the Primavera. Mythological themes, mythological themes were quite frequently represented on marriage chests, caskets, and on tapestries. But as far as we know, Botticelli was the first to paint mythological paintings of such a monumental kind after the Middle Ages, which in their size and in their seriousness vied with the religious art of the period. A recent discovered inventory of 1499 has totally changed all previous conceptions of the history of this artwork. The traditional view that it was made for the Medici country villa di Castello, based on the writings of Vasari, and here I have a representation of the Villa di Castello as it is today. And Vasari saw the painting in this villa in 1550, and that view has been completely overturned. This new 1499 inventory, however, records it hanging in the city palace of the Medicis, the well-known Medici Palace that we see over there in Florence today, and where the young Lorenzo di Pier Francesco de Medici and his brother Giovanni grew up. They were the wards and cousins of Lorenzo de Medici, commonly known as Lorenzo il Magnifico. We see them at the top over there, Lorenzo di Pier Francesco, with a medallion of his great-grandfather Cosimo de Medici, and then a portrait also by Botticelli of Giovanni de Medici. And they were the wards of Il Magnifico, which we see at the bottom here. He was effectively the ruler of Florence at the time, and interesting enough also is that he was the patron of the most famous artists of that time, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Perugino, and so forth. We now know that Il Magnifico commissioned the Primavera as a wedding gift for Lorenzo di Pier Francesco in May 1482. The work decorated an anteroom attached to Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco's chambers. Primavera hung over a large elaborate bench with a backboard, with the bottom of the painting at about the viewer's eye level, and opposite it was another of Botticelli's mythological paintings, namely the Palace and Centaur, which we saw in that first slide. And here you see Palace standing next to the Centaur. And then, of course, also a large painting of the Virgin and Child, which hung next to these in the bed, the anteroom. When Botticelli began his Primavera, he had only just returned from Rome, where he had executed a number of fresco paintings on the walls of the Sistine Chapel for the Pope Sixtus IV. And I show you here one of those paintings. He painted 3, and this is the Temptation of Christ. There was also a painting on the life of Moses and a painting on the writing of the Korah. The successful completion of this prestigious commission cemented his already high reputation and led to more commissions from families in high society at that time. Botticelli's most important clients belonged to the humanist circle associated with the Medici family, and so were especially interested in classical mythology and the study of antiquity. Primavera, which we see here, is one of the first known large paintings from the post-classical period which portrays classical gods and goddesses, life-size and virtually naked. Let us now look at this famous painting carefully and in detail and without any preconceptions. The setting is a semicircular meadow with green grasses and many flowering plants. And we can see that clearly if we look at the circle formed by the meadow here. That meadow is enclosed by an outer line of spruce encircling a hedge of orange trees. We see the orange trees over there with white blossoms and golden fruit. And there we can have a closer view of the white blossoms and the golden fruit of the oranges painted in this garden. It is the classical garden of Venus, imagined by Botticelli as the garden of the Hesperides. In classical myth, this garden with golden apples lying in the west was dedicated to Venus and guarded by the daughters of Atlas, the Hesperides. It was from this garden that Venus plucked the 3 golden apples that she gave to Hippomenes so that he might win the race over Atlanta. And we all know the classical myth of Atlanta, who was the fastest lady in the world, and the only way that Hippomenes could win her was to distract her attention with the golden apple. So every time she was catching up to him, he dropped the golden apple, and then she bent down to pick up the apple, and that way he won the race and he married her. These golden apples were later identified as citrus fruit. The Garden of Venus enjoying perpetual spring. The painting shows 6 female figures and 2 male ones, and I have this schematic view showing the 6 female figures in blue, the male figures in red, and then there is also a Cupid in the orange grove, and the movement of the composition is from right to left. This painting is virtually unprecedented in Western art since classical antiquity. Here you can see as it is in its frame in the Uffizi. The basic identification of the figures is now widely agreed. At the far right, we see Zephyr, the ice-cold wind of March, lustfully kidnapping and possessing the nymph Chloris. There he appears out of the bush over there and he grabs her, whom he later marries and transforms into Flora, the figure we see there, the goddess of spring. We see Zephyr flying down through the trees on the right, bending them forward and blowing the draperies of Chloris violently forward in quite the opposite direction to those of the Graces. The wind that flutters the draperies of the Graces is the wind on which thin clouds drift into the picture at the top left. I will show you them just now. Botticelli was careful to indicate that the background scene of Zephyr and Chloris takes place at a different moment in time to the rest of the picture by making the trees and the drapery of Chloris blow in the opposite direction to the drapery of the Graces and of Flora. So if we look carefully, we see, if you look at Flora, the wind's blowing this way, and if you look at these figures and Chloris, the wind's blowing that way. So we have a break here. That timing in that part of the painting is different to the timing in this part of the painting. And that's for a specific reason. We will see that just now. Botticelli was careful to indicate that the background scene of Zephyr and Chloris takes place at a different moment in time to the rest of the picture by making the trees and the drapery of Chloris blow in the opposite direction to the drapery of the Graces and of Flora. The trees are also different. They are bay laurels, surely chosen as an allusion to Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco's name. Laurel Lorenzo. Oops, now I'm going back, sorry. Flora, or Flora's story, repeats the nuptial symbolism of the main scene, namely the one of love ending in marriage. That's what the painting is about. Love ending in marriage. A nice picture to put on the wall of the chamber of a young man that's going to get married. The theme of love is emphasized by Flora's gesture. For roses, you see her, she's holding a whole bunch of roses in her dress over here, and she's going to distribute the roses in the field. That is her gesture there. The theme of love is emphasized by Flora's gesture, for roses are the flowers of Venus, as well as the flowers of spring, and therefore the flowers of love, especially joyous love. Botticelli depicted Chloris turning into Flora by literally painting flowers coming out of her mouth. The fact that Chloris was not the one to choose her mate reflects 15th century culture, where women had very little control over who they wed. Very often it was a marriage of convenience. It was done not for love, but marriage was done for material purposes. So an important man would marry his daughter to another important man. This is something that comes out, that Botticelli and the originators of this painting criticizes. In the center, and somewhat set back from the other figures, we see Venus, a red draped woman in blue, a very light blue, the veil that she has, or the mantle she has over her arm there, and then this red mantle in the front. She wears a white robe, braided beneath the breasts and embroidered with golden rays. Her thrust forward belly was a posture considered very beautiful in the 15th century. She's the epitome of female beauty at that time, a belly that sticks out. Around her neck is a gold chain set with pearls, the gems of purity. Her head is inclined to the left, and she gestures with her right hand towards the three dancing graces. And you can see it's almost a gesture of blessing, like we would find in the Virgin Mary. The dominating position of Venus underlines the importance and the centrality of this figure. She was both goddess of lust and goddess of love and marriage. Venus appears here in her character as a goddess of marriage, clothed and with her hair modestly covered. The new Platonic philosopher or philosophers saw Venus as ruling over both earthly and divine love, and argued that she was the classical equivalent of the Virgin Mary. This is alluded to by the way her head is surrounded by a halo formed by the trees that is similar to contemporary images of the Virgin Mary. Can you see it? The light behind her forms half a halo. It's repeated with the seam of this dress, so it's actually a halo behind her head over there. The earthly Venus, and here we see how beautifully Botticelli drew these faces, is compared to the Christian idea of caritas, and therefore takes on the role as mediator, like the Holy Virgin Mary. In the painting, Venus actually becomes the Virgin Mary, and she becomes the mediator in human affairs. According to this, Renaissance conventions determine that earthly love should be hopeless. This is a very important fact. Earthly love should be hopeless. A young man and a married woman could indulge in a game of love in public without damaging her reputation. This was acceptable in that time. And this was seen as Platonic love. We've probably heard of Platonic love. Simonetta Vespucci, the most beautiful woman of that time, who unfortunately died of consumption when she was only 26 years old. There she is, painted by almost all the early Renaissance painters. She was the most beautiful woman. She was the wife of Marco Vespucci, the brother of Americo Vespucci, the guy who gave the name to America. And according to popular legend, the mistress of Giuliano de' Medici has been mentioned to have been the model for Venus in both the paintings. In the painting of the birth of Venus, and also here in this painting, she was the model. Simonetta was also the aunt of Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco's bride, Semiramide. So she is placed in the painting also for a purpose. Cupid, white-winged and blindfolded, flies above Venus and shoots a flame-headed arrow at the central grace. Like God, Venus is represented by a trinity. I think what one must also understand is the whole Neoplatonic conception. The Neoplatonists believed that all revelation was divine. And the revelation in the classical era from the mythological world was as divine as the Bible itself. The three graces represent giving, receiving, and giving back. The three figures that you see there. Giving, receiving, and giving back. They normally didn't have names, but in time they have been given names. Beauty, chastity, and you'll see I have. Come on. Beauty, chastity, and pleasure. And here we see the faces of beauty and the face of pleasure. And I will show you chastity just now. The Neoplatonists believed that heavenly love is given to man. He accepts and honors it. That is the story of giving, receiving, and giving back. They believed, in other words, heavenly love is given to man. That is giving. He accepts and honors it. That is the receiving. And then it is given back to the Creator as intellectual adoration. These graces, attendants of Venus, are tall, golden-haired, and all show the same refined sensuality. They are absorbed in each other in their stately round dance, in which their fingers are locked. We saw those. I think I just can go back to that. Yeah, you can see the locked fingers. All three are clad in virginal white and have long, loose flowing tresses, a sign that they are unmarried virgins. Their diaphanous robes cling to their rounded forms, suggesting the beauty of their nakedness beneath the rippling caress of the floating stuff. There is chastity with her back towards us, and of course beauty again. And when we look at these figures, we see that they are all adorned with brooches. It is significant that the grace with her back turned to us does not have a pendant around her neck as the other two have. In other words, the other two are spoken for, she is not spoken for. She's a representation of Semiramide, the future wife of Pier Francesco di Medici. She looks towards Mercury. And if we... There's Mercury. She looks towards Mercury. And some interpretations, especially those identifying the figures as modeled on actual individuals, see this couple as one to match Chloris and Zephyr on the other side of the painting. So on the one side of the painting you would have Chloris and Zephyr, representative of lust and barbarous living. On the other side you would have Mercury and Semiramide, or the Grace with her back turned to the world, as the ideal of civilized love and the civilized world. It's interesting how it's used over here in this painting. Mercury, whom we see over here, gazes beyond the canvas at Primavera's companion piece, Pallas and the Centaur, which I showed you just now, in which, as recorded at that time, love oriented towards knowledge. That was a description of what the Pallas and Athena was all about. It was love oriented towards knowledge. Proves triumphant over lust, symbolized by the centaur. The centaur in the painting is a symbol of lust. The implication of this work is therefore that Semiramide, or the Grace turned with her back towards us, renounces earthly carnal love, represented by Zephyr to the right, and turns her back to the sea, unconcerned by the threat represented to her by Cupid. She will therefore quit her virgin state for marriage. It is important to remember that in Botticelli's day, as in antiquity, girls of rank were kept strictly sheltered and guarded so that they came pure and virgin to the marriage bed. It has been said that Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco was the model for Mercury in the painting, and that his bride, Semiramide, is represented as the Grace with her back towards us. No clouds are permitted, as I already mentioned, in this garden, to chill or darken the garden of Venus. And Mercury raises his caduceus to expel them. There we can see his hand with the caduceus, and it's interesting to see that the caduceus has dragons attached to it. And he's those little clouds that you see coming in on the far left side of the painting at the top there, he's chasing them away. Mercury, and there you can see him on the right hand side, poised with youthful grace and assurance, stands facing outwards to the left, with his sword hanging over his left thigh in a black sheath tipped with gilt metal. He wears a winged helmet because he is the god who keeps the entrance of the Garden of Venus. He is closely linked with Venus because, according to ancient sources, Cupid was born of the union of Mercury and Venus. He is not only the messenger of the gods, he is also the god of spring. And that is, of course, what this painting is all about. And the word Primavera means spring. It deals with spring, but it's more than just spring. How must this picture be interpreted? And I'm going to give you the latest interpretation of this work. The painting Primavera draws from a number of classical and Renaissance literary sources, including the works of the ancient Roman poet Ovid, and less certainly Lucretius, and may also allude to a poem by Poliziano, the Medici house poet, who may have helped Botticelli devise the composition of this work. It consequently reflects a deep knowledge of classical literature and philosophy that Botticelli is unlikely to have possessed. There are many allegorical meanings whose interpretation is difficult and still uncertain. It has been analyzed by many scholars in order to understand its meanings, and several hypotheses have been proposed. The most plausible are the ones that emphasize the link with Neoplatonic philosophy. Neoplatonism was a philosophical and aesthetic movement trying to blend the thought of the Greek philosopher Plato with the noblest concepts of Christianity. In other words, it was the typical Renaissance idea of combining the ancient world, the antique world, with the Christian world. According to the Florentine Neoplatonic philosopher Marsilio Ficino, to live in beauty is a way to cross the earthly dimension. I'll repeat that. To live in beauty is a way to cross the earthly dimension, and it is a proposal of a refined lifestyle. He saw beauty as a gateway to the divine and pleads for the control of physical passions. The Neoplatonic conception of ideal beauty and absolute love influenced the Renaissance culture and consequently also Botticelli. It's a new approach to the idea of marriage, that marriage was not like in the medieval world a marriage of convenience, a contract. In the new world, a marriage had to also include divine love. It had to include love, which is important. A new, more civilized approach to marriage. What is certain is the humanistic meaning of the work. Venus is the humanitas in this painting, or goodwill, as she distinguishes the material, which we see on the right side here, the material world, from the spiritual values on the left side of the painting. So there's that's why she's in the middle. She distinguishes, as Venus Humanitas, she distinguishes between the uncivilized and the civilized. This Humanitas promotes the ideal of the positive man, confident in his abilities and sensitive in the needs of others. See, a nice moral lesson for the young Pier Francesco. This is how a positive, civilized man must bear himself. And the interesting thing is that's why he said in the beginning that, doesn't help telling the young boy these things over and over and over again. You must show it in pictures. And that's why he got Botticelli to paint this picture. Primavera is therefore an illustration of Neoplatonic love and must be seen as a Neoplatonic allegory invented by Marsilio Ficino, in which Venus symbolizes humanitas, the gentle, humanizing virtue that Ficino allotted to her planet in a letter of moral and religious exhortation written to Lorenzo di Pier Francesco around 1477. There are a number of letters that Ficino wrote to the young boy, 14 years old, about how to be a civilized human being. And in one of those letters, he emphasizes the importance of the planet of Venus as the symbol of humanitas. Primavera was painted to remind Lorenzo of the duty of humanitas. The principal action in Primavera lies between Venus and Cupid, here in the middle of the painting. That's where the principal action is. And of course, the Grace, who's with her back towards us, whose heart they intend to pierce with the arrow of love and fire with its flame. Venus, with the help of Cupid usually ignites carnal love. That is the usual thing. Usually ignites carnal love. But by means of humanitas, she directs it with a process of intellectual sublimation represented by the three graces, to its ultimate aim of contemplation, here represented by Mercury. A complete change in the way that love is approached in the world of this time. Rejecting carnal love in and in its place divine love which works through humanitas, the civilizing grace that we see over here. The kindling of love in a pure and beautiful grace is an obvious compliment to the young bride Semiramide. In Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco's case, Semiramide di Appiano, whom he was going to marry in May 1482, is the actual emphasis of this painting itself. In this painting, therefore, physical love, symbolized by Zephyr, is renounced by the central member of the Graces, who turns her back on him and Cupid and gazes at Mercury. The winged messenger is himself looking out beyond the canvas at the painting of Pallas and the Centaur, which, as already mentioned, hung opposite Primavera and which portrays the victory of virtue over lust. So, in actual fact, this painting deals with the victory of virtue over lust. In conclusion, one must marvel at such a beautiful wedding gift with its deep-seated moral message. Little wonder that it remained in Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco's anteroom to his bedchamber all his life. The message is a reminder of how a civilized man, under the influence of humanitas, should conduct himself in civilized society. Now, I want to just close off by showing you this graph, which shows the cumulative number of artists who were inspired by Botticelli's Primavera, this painting, from the 1880s until 2010. And you can see in the 1880s, towards the end of the 1880s, only 5 artists were inspired by the painting. And look how it's grown over the years to the recent times, where more than 20 artists have been inspired by this work, which is surely an indication that it is an important work in the history of art. And then in closing, I want to show you since 2010 a great number of books have been written about these works. And I want to show you some of the more important books. On the far left is the latest book. It's a book written by Lane Spollen under the guise of spring, the message hidden in Botticelli's Primavera, which very much is the message that I gave you here today. Then a 2010 book, which I think also deals with the same subject matter, by Jean Gillies, written in 2010, Botticelli's Primavera, the young Lorenzo's transformation, which deals with this whole idea of how Lorenzo is transformed from a young 14-year-old to a civilized young man. And then a very standard work is this one by Joanne Snow Smith, published in 1993, The Primavera of Sandro Botticelli, a Neoplatonic interpretation, the latest interpretation. And then I thought it good to include a bestseller also. There's a bestseller which appeared 2 years ago on the market by Italian art writer, Marina Fiorato, and it's very much like the Dan Brown story on the Da Vinci Code, but this is called the Botticelli Secret. And I'm not going to spoil the background to tell you what it's all about. You can go and buy it and then enjoy it, because it's a very interesting book that brings up very interesting things about the background in which this painting, the Primavera that we looked at, was written. Thank you. Questions?
Could you just repeat that quote you have on to live in beauty?
Oh, the Marcello Ficino's quote. Let's just see if I can quickly find it.
It was his second last page.
To live in beauty is a way to cross the earthly dimension. To live in beauty is a way to cross the earthly dimension. And it is a proposal of a refined lifestyle. I think a good example for anybody who loves art. Thank you. Any questions?
It's like Primavera.
Maar dis 'n heerlike skildery. Dis 'n pragtige werk.
Jy het gesê jy kom van ons wys daai ene wat Mercury na kyk.
O, ek kom reg aan die begin het gesien. Kom ons gaan net terug na hom toe.
Ja, dis reg.
Wat 'n mens moet onthou is dat hierdie skilderye is nie net vir die skoonheid daarvan geskilder nie. Die morele boodskap wat hy oorgedra het is net so belangrik. Was eintlik belangriker. En dis nie net 'n morele boodskap, dis 'n beskawingsboodskap. Want jy weet ons het gehoor president het ook een keer gepraat van die African Renaissance, maar die African Renaissance het eintlik niks te doen met wat hierdie hele ding is nie. Mens moet die Renaissance baie breër sien. Die Renaissance is waar die westerse wêreld het uit die donker eeue, van die middeleeue uitgekom in die lig van die Renaissance, waar die Renaissance soveel nuwe dinge na vore gebring het, wat behoue gebly het in ons beskawing as kenmerkend van om beskaafd te wees. En dit is so belangrik, daai beskaafde eienskappe wat hier uitgekom het. Natuurlik daar's soveel meer wat ek kon sê oor hierdie skildery. Daar is so baie detail, betekenisse in die skildery self dat dit kan 'n hele dag vat om al die detail uit te wys en die simboliese betekenis van die goed. Daar's soveel simboliese betekenis wat in die kunswerk vasgevang is en wat dikwels nie na vore gekom is. 'n Mens kan kyk byvoorbeeld na die manier wat die mense in die prentvlak geplaas is. Dit is ook 'n deel van die belangrikheid van die figure. So dit is 'n magnifieke werk en dit is eintlik 'n bestuuring dat hy behoue gebly het. Want in die tyd net nadat die skilderye, hierdie mitologiese skilderye gemaak is, het Savonarola aan bewind gekom in Florence. En hulle het honderde klassieke werke wat bestaan het. Ek praat nou nie net van skilderye nie, maar boeke en alles wat bestaan het in daai tyd het hulle laat verbrand, want hulle het dit gesien as deel van die duiwel. En gelukkig hierdie werke is weggesteek. Niemand weet waar nie, maar hulle was weggesteek en op daai manier het hulle oorleef. Maar daar is honderde werke regtig vernietig in die naam van Christendom, want Savonarola was 'n monnik wat die beheer in Florence oorgeneem het en ook die Medicis uitgejaag het uit Florence uit. En vir 'n hele rukkie, ek meen mense soos Michelangelo het gevlug uit Florence in daai tyd van Savonarola, want dit was 'n skrikbewind. Dit was 'n skrikbewind in Florence, maar dit het so 5 jaar geduur en toe dit verbygegaan. Toe die Medicis weer teruggekom.
Hier is nie 'n vraag nie, dis 'n opmerking. Er is so baie contemporêre huidige kunstenaars, maar gaan baie min boeke geskryf word oor die individuele skilderye.
Nee, dit is so. Ja, dit is so. Nee, maar ek dink dit is 'n magnifieke werk en ek kan sien waarom hy resorteer onder van die belangrikste kunswerke van alle tye. Nie net op gebied van die skoonheid nie, maar op die gebied van die boodskap wat hy oordra en die agtergrondkennis wat hy vir ons gee oor die Renaissance tydperk. So as jy nou weer ooit 'n kans kry om in die Uffizi te kom, gaan staan daar en kyk na hierdie werk, want dit is openbaar, dit is regtig 'n pragtige werk. Hy sal weer beteken, ja.
Hoe groot is hy presies?
Hy is enorm. Hy sal hier, hy is 10 voet, 10,3 voet in lengte, so, en hy is oor die 6 voet hoog. So dit is 'n enorme groot werk. Ja, hulle is omtrent, hulle is so te sê, ek dink as ons teruggaan na daai eerste skyfie wat ek julle gewys het, dan kry jy 'n mooi idee daarso. Sien daai meisie wat daar staan, is baie naby aan die grootte van die wiens, soos omtrent die lewensgrootte. Plesier. Groot plesier. Volgende keer, dit sal volgende jaar wees, gaan ek gesels oor Leonardo se Last Supper. En dis 'n interessante ene want daar's baie polemiek rondom Dan Brown en die nonsens wat hy geskryf het daaroor, maar dit gaan baie interessant wees. Die ongeluk natuurlik is dat ons praat eintlik oor iets wat nie meer bestaan nie. Ek het nou die dag 'n stuk gelees waar een van die mense wat die laaste restaurasie gedoen het. Jy weet die restaurasie het in 1993 begin en dit was in 2015 eers klaar. Het hulle nou die restaurasie klaar. En as jy nou na daai skildery gaan kyk, dan moet jy afspraak maak. En net 15 persone kry geleentheid om die werk te sien per geleentheid per dag. So jy moet lank voor die tyd afspraak maak om te sien. En die restaurateur sê dat van die oorspronklike Leonardo skildery wat oor is daar so 3%. 3%.
Moet hulle oorgeverf?
Nadat hulle al die oorverf en alles wat daar was weggevat het, is net van die oorspronklike Leonardo se kwaswerk wat daar is 3% oor. Die ander het hulle nou ingevul met waterverf. Hulle het byvoorbeeld daar waar daar niks meer is nie, van Leonardo nie, het hulle dit met waterverf aangedui hoe die kunswerk moontlik sou gelyk het, want ons is baie gelukkig 2 jaar nadat Leonardo dit klaargemaak het, het een van sy beste studente 'n absolute 100% kopie daarvan gemaak in olie. En die het behoue gebly en hy is vandag in die National Gallery in Londen. En daai werk is wonderlik want jy kan 'n idee kry van hoe die skildery gelyk het van daardie en ek sal vir julle dit alles wys. Maar dis interessant. En dan daarna natuurlik wat ek baie na uitsien, gaan ek kyk na die Sistynse kapel plafon. En die idees wat Michelangelo daar uitgebeeld het. Nie na die individuele panele nie, maar na die kunswerk as geheel. Ons gaan daarna kyk.
Goed. En is dit min of meer dieselfde tyd op 'n jaar?
Ek verstaan so wat ek wil probeer is om groot skerm te kry. Want hierdie is net te klein, jy weet. ek het hom nou die dag by die universiteit op 'n groot skerm gesit en dis totaal iets anders. 'n Mens moet dit op 'n groot skerm sien.
Ja.
Want dan kry jy mens regtig sien jy die detail wat jy nie hier sien met hierdie klein wieltjies. Goed, baie dankie.